Hello and welcome to the Class Video Spotlight Series. I'm Emily Paxman, the Vice President of Analysis and Consulting Services, and I'm joined today by Shafer Jackson, who oversees our telehealth research. Great to have you here today.
Great. Thanks for having me, Emily. Yeah, as you mentioned, I covered telehealth and remote patient monitoring here at Class, and it's obviously been an exciting few topics that we've seen over the last year.
Yes, I think back to my early days at Class doing reports in this space, and I remember having just a little blurb at the bottom of our reports about remote patient monitoring, and it definitely seems that things have changed thanks to COVID. Are there other factors that are driving some of those changes?
Yeah, so as the dust settles a little bit with telehealth and we see organizations kind of solidify their telehealth decisions, some of that energy is now being focused on remote patient monitoring and having that information for patients that are maybe in the home and doing some of those virtual visits.
So you recently published in this space a report on a vendor called CareSimple. Can you tell me a little bit about them and what they do?
Yeah, CareSimple is one of the remote patient monitoring vendors that we've been in conversation with. And as we talk to healthcare organizations, remote patient monitoring comes up more and more as the dust, as I mentioned, with telehealth kind of settling a little bit. And as a remote patient monitoring vendor, they provide insights into some of the vitals that are important with patients now being more at home. Mm-hmm. And with many different use cases at home, healthcare organizations can have those insights into some of the vitals that they need to care for their patients.
So that's really interesting. I love that idea of being able to be at home and still getting that great, excellent care. And I'm guessing that they're not the only ones that are diving into this market. What about them is special or unique? Why did we focus on them in this report as opposed to a competitor?
Yeah, that's a great question. In CareSimple, they have some of their own equipment, some of their own devices that are ready as they show up to a patient's home. They're, no Wi-Fi or connections that need to happen. It works right out of the box. They also have some support and services that allow healthcare organizations to be successful as they implement remote patient monitoring as a strategy. So those are a couple of things that make CareSimple a little bit unique and maybe something that a provider should consider as a remote patient monitoring vendor.
Now, I've never talked to any of their customers, but I have talked to customers using other similar systems, and there's a lot of different barriers, it seems, to really be successful in this market. One of the ones I hear a lot about is just trusting the devices. Is this a problem that they've dealt with, and have they been able to address that effectively?
Yeah, and as I mentioned, working out of the box is something that helps with that. So there's no connection or tech knowledge that needs to be in place to help a patient start using the device. Mm-hmm. But yes, this is an overall category issue that comes up, and patients need to not only trust the device but be able to use the device and provide information to the healthcare organizations. And healthcare organizations need to have that information be accurate so that they're not having incidents or have patients sent into to the hospital or an ED just because of an inaccurate measurement. Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like if I draw from my real software background here, a lot of software solutions, you go through this tuning process where, HIM coding is a great example where you're making sure that all the codes are just right and that you're getting the right responses up, and that can take a while. Is that what happens in this space in order to make sure that the clinicians at the health system can trust the information they're getting, or does that out of the box really transfer right over from the second it's given to the patient to the second that the information gets to the health system?
The hope is that it works right out of the box, and as you can imagine, a lot of the patients that are using some of these remote patient technologies are elderly and maybe have some challenges with technology.
Oh, I bet.
And so the importance of you working right out of the box and making sure there is no troubleshooting that's involved from a patient perspective is important to help that information to start to flow.
So it's interesting to hear you talk about that from the patient's perspective, because in my experience at Class, when I go write a report or I work with a vendor and I talk about service and support, I'm mostly talking about what the vendor is doing for the health system. But in this case, you have a patient, somebody who may be elderly or have connectivity issues. Who do they call? Is that typically the responsibility of the health system, or does the vendor really take that burden off them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in some cases there's a hybrid where health systems are available to troubleshoot some support issues, but also the vendors, it's important for them to be able to help patients be successful as they use these devices. And we see that with telehealth, some of the virtual visit vendors as well, where providers have turned into IT or tech support because they the connection maybe is poor, or a video won't pull up the way they see it. So, and in some cases, it's beneficial for the providers to not have to deal with some of these issues that might come up from a support perspective. And also with remote patient monitoring, not having to keep devices on hand, inventory, and managing, when inventory or a device goes out to a patient or comes back. Those are things that the vendor can potentially help out with to ease some of the burden.
So if I'm hearing that correctly, it sounds like there's potentially some planning there to make sure that the devices are being used at all times to make sure the provider gets maximum value. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's one of the challenges with RPM is kind of patient load and planning for the number of devices you might need. If a patient's on a device for 30, 60, 90 days, is there another patient that can help the health system continue to use that device to improve patient care, or do we need to wait for someone to come in that will be using the device? That's one of the challenges that we see kind of health systems have to work through, is what's the long-term viability of having a device or working with the vendor on remote patient monitoring?
That guidance piece seems to be super important in this space. Obviously, the functionality and the use cases matter, but I think the three things we've been talking about so far are: how do you make sure that the data is accurate and can be trusted? How do you make sure that there is support both on the health system and the patient end of things? And how do you put together an effective strategy to really see a return on that investment? For this particular vendor, what does that support experience, what's the relationship like? What are their customers telling us?
Yeah, their customers are talking about the ability for CareSimple to come in and provide some of those things that you mentioned, the support, strategic guidance, and willing to work through some of the tech challenges that might come up as well. And those are issues that health systems have with not only CareSimple, but as they get into some of these virtual solutions, these issues come up over and over again. And as you know, Emily, you've been here a long time at class. Being prescriptive and helping health systems be successful is something that's very important. And I think it'll be important in this RPM space in particular, as it's still so new and ongoing. What does success look like for an RPM program?
I wonder, especially in a space that is so rapidly emerging, where there's a lot of new players coming in, being prescriptive, like you said, to help the health system can be incredibly valuable, but it feels like we're still figuring a lot of things out, whether it's the value piece, perhaps things around reimbursement, integration. So it seems to me like there's still a responsibility on the health system to almost anticipate some of their own needs. What types of questions would a really good health system ask of a potential vendor, whether it's CareSimple or otherwise,
Sure.
as they get into the space?
Yeah, I think you mentioned integration. Obviously, that's important. If without the integration, do patients have to have an app separate from their patient portal potentially? Do they have to have an additional app to do a video visit? So those are some things that integration could potentially help solve. Reimbursement is another one. If there's not a patient to follow up the patient that just was using the equipment, how do we make sure this is a financially viable solution that we're going to implement, or strategy that we would have in our health system? So those are a couple of the main questions that a provider should ask.
So as I read that report, one of the things that stood out to me was just the level of knowledge that CareSimple has about the market and how valuable that is to providers and health systems. That was one of my big takeaways. Is there anything that we haven't talked about or that I missed in that reading that you think, if somebody's going to look at this vendor, this is an absolute key takeaway as they go forward and make that decision?
Yeah, I think you brought up one of the key points is that kind of expertise and knowledge in this space. And as a result, we saw all of the customers that we talked to would purchase CareSimple again. And so I think what you mentioned comes out as we've had those conversations with customers. And I think, the ease of use, working out of the box, and being really easy for these patients that are in the home is something that obviously a provider should consider. And then the type of connection, the cellular versus Bluetooth. CareSimple has this cellular capability that provides some other robust capabilities that might be something that's interesting for a healthcare provider to consider as well.
That's really helpful. Well, thank you for being willing to discuss with me today some of the challenges in the market, some of the cool opportunities as well, as well as some of the interesting things that are happening with CareSimple. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Emily.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. We at CLAS are always trying to make sure that we are doing everything we can to help health systems really be successful with their technology. If you are aware of any really innovative or cool technologies that are just starting to emerge that could make a real difference for your peers, we would love if you would let us know. You can send us an email at etech@classresearch.com. And if you want to see the full readout of the report and CareSimple that we've been discussing today, you can view that on our website, which is classresearch.com.